Hi, Akarja. This is Lora O'Brien, and I'm here for another conversation drawn straight from the book, The Morrigan, Ireland's Goddess. And this is the new book that I have dedicated years of research to so that you don't have to get lost in internet rabbit holes. I see how many of you have reached out after the last episode, and the questions that are always circling around the same curious territory are along the lines of: is the Morrigan really one goddess or is she three? Am I connecting with the right name? Is Badb just a poetic word? And how do Macha or Nemain fit in? So, if you've ever worried about getting it wrong, you are honestly not alone. It is complicated, it's complex. This is gods we're dealing with. So, expecting an easy fix or a simple answer is just not realistic. So let's anchor this in actual source texts from the get-go, which, I always do. You are not failing because you find contradictions. Again, this is complicated stuff. They exist. Contradictions exist because the manuscripts themselves don't always agree. And never mind the translations of them. And the frustration of wading through conflicting names and stories, that's not just a modern problem. It's woven right into the fabric of the tradition. And it's something we've always had to deal with. From the earliest oral traditions, right through the manuscript tradition, right through to, the Gaelic revival and the academic interest that was on a resurgence. So that confusion and that sense of being an outsider, I found in modern day with my contemporary students, really haunts so many sincere people who are drawn to the Morrigan. And you might be really longing for these kind of trustworthy roots or lore that gives you permission and a way forward without having to choose sides or feel paralyzed by, choices, by ambiguity, by contradictions, by feeling like you're never going to get this, So my wish is always the same. I want for you real connection, academic clarity, and confidence that respects both the goddess and your own journey, because both of those things are very important. There's no point in any of us projecting our own stuff onto these goddesses, but this is your spirituality, this is your practice. So while you can root yourself, and I recommend you rooting yourself firmly in the academics, you also have to have these personal experiences and then integrate it into your everyday life. So that's what we're trying to do here. So first let's look at the manuscript reality. So one goddess or three. We're going to bring a spotlight onto Lora O'Brien, the Book of Invasions or the Book of the Taking of Ireland, which is kind of a legendary origin story for Ireland's people, honestly, for the island anyway. So the Morrigan, Badb and Macha are listed as the daughters of Ernmas in the genealogies of this book. Sometimes, again, there's various versions of it as well, so be careful, but also through the same manuscript, differences and contradictions will happen too. So sometimes Anon is included, sometimes identified as the same as the Morrigan, sometimes glossed as Anu or even Danu, right? So occasionally some of this is scribal confusion, to be honest. Again, we're dealing with copies of copies of copies of original oral stories that were being written down. So scribal confusion is a whole thing, right? And you might see a fourth name added to this kind of three goddesses, right? There was a mix-up. Medieval scribes basically made a mistake with their abbreviations for IE and, right? So complicated. We don't have to get into all that, right? But that's why, and that's where it comes from, I believe. Anyway, I understand. So in these sources, though, in the source manuscripts, sometimes the name Morrigan appears, sometimes it's replaced by Anon, Anu, or Danu. Sometimes the list gets expanded to Badb, Macha, Morrigan, and Anon. or Anu, but it's probably meant to be 3 daughters, even when there are 4 names, right? So I do go into all this in the book. I really lay it all out, showing you the manuscript sources, making sure that you understand how the manuscript works. So if it seems overwhelming, then there is a resource there for you if you buy my book. Sorry, I know this isn't just a sales pitch for the book. I really want to try and give people the value of it as well. But obviously on a podcast and a book, there's a different platform. So I go into it very deeply through the book if you are interested in taking it further. But it doesn't stop with Lora O'Brien Éireann for sure. In the Cathmachira, the second Battle of Moitura, the famous saga, the sisters appear again, but their actions and their names kind of blur as well. Sometimes the Badb is acting independently, or Nemain appears alongside Badb, sometimes as her sister, sometimes as a distinct battle goddess. And this isn't just in the Cathmachira, this is in the Tombo Cúilne as well. And it's just, again, it all gets pretty complicated, right? But just understand that all of these things are true. Now, hold that in your brain for a minute. Like, all of these things are true as far as the mythological resources that we have are, right? Nemain is kind of especially slippery as we look at her through the mythology, right? Because some cycles link her as a wife to Niech, the war god, co-wife with the Badb, actually, in some cases. And sometimes Nemain's name gets folded back in as simply another face of the Badb or of Macha, all depending on which monk had the quill at the time, I guess, right? And then glossaries and medieval dictionaries kind of muddy it even further. So you see notes like Macha, i.e. Badb, or Macha the third Morrigan, and explanations that Badb and Nemain are the same, or that Morrigan is just a group name, or that Badb is a group name. And other times each goddess has her own stories, her own powers, her own links, and her own place, right? So it's kind of like a web. So sometimes it's knotted, sometimes it's loose, it's always shifting. What I want you to kind of look at, we'll get to kind of how you can start to make sense of this now in a second. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, don't worry about it. I really wanted to lay out the complexity of it, right? But the medieval scribes no 2 medieval scholars really handled the names and the roles in exactly the same way, or manuscripts even, because there were multiple scribes that were working in even the same manuscript, right? So sometimes the Morrigan is a broad term for powerful supernatural women. Sometimes Badb, Macha and Anan are the trio even. Sometimes Nemain, Fea and others are layered in. And all through the tales you find actions, attributes and stories which switch from one name to another. So one scribe's list or reference was not another's, and that's kind of how living traditions work as well, native traditions rather. They change, they adapt, they get tangled, and they tell their own truth at the time and in the context and in the place. But you kind of have to zoom out then for the bigger picture. So let's kind of take all that on board, take a breath and zoom out a little bit. So what I want you to think of is the Morrigan as a personal name, as a title, and as a noun, right? So as a personal name, the Morrigan is a goddess in her own right. She is the Morrigan. Or Morrigan, you can actually just refer to her as Morrigan if you are like directly in a personal context, okay? You are addressing that goddess. Then we have the title. So the Morrigan as a title, the Great Queen or the Phantom Queen, right? Whichever way, we talked about that in the previous episode. But whichever way you want to look at it, again, I would choose the Great Queen as my own personal working translation, but you do you, boo, right? So the Morrigan as a title can apply to any of the sisters or aspects. Again, whether they're sisters or aspects, is your own decision as well. For me personally, I relate to them all independently. These are autonomous goddesses as far as I'm concerned. I relate to them as sisters, colleagues, co-workers, bitches on a mission. However you want to do that is your own thing, but that's how I would view them, and certainly how they have presented themselves to me. So take that as you will, right? So if we think of them as sisters or aspects, they can share the title of Great Queen or Phantom Queen, right? And then as a noun, Morrigan or Badb can be used as a descriptor for a powerful supernatural woman, or a demon of the air, a female demon of the air in some cases. So we can see Badbs or Morrigans described in that way, that if there is a section in a story where a supernatural, powerful female entity appears, she could be described as a Morrigan or a Badb, right? So hopefully that maybe resets things a little bit for you. The complexity is still complex, but that would be the general kind of zoomed out view that I work with myself personally, but also that I teach. And of course, that's the perspective I have taken in the book. So if you've been bracing yourself for like academic disappointment, right? If you've been overwhelmed with all this, just take a breath, okay? It is messy. It is overwhelming. You are not alone with that. And the true lesson is that our Irish ancestors lived with this ambiguity, lived with these meanings that weren't simple or clear, that were ineffable or unknowable because they're gods, right? Our ancestors didn't seem to have sought a clean answer or a simplified explanation. They honoured the complexity, and that is what I would encourage you to do, right? So the manuscripts support working with the Morrigan as a whole, but they also show that Badb, Macha, Nemain, Fea, they can all step forward separately, sometimes as forces of battle and sometimes as sovereign queens, sometimes as shapeshifters, sometimes as prophets, sometimes as cursors, sometimes as satirists. All of this is present in the lore. So for the contemporary spiritual practitioner or seeker, especially somebody outside of Ireland or coming from the diaspora, here's what actually matters, right? Working with the Morrigan is real, scholarly, and supported by sources. Honouring Badb, Macha, or Nemain on their own is also valid and rooted in, again, old stories, mythology, all of that, right? You don't have to pick one true path. I'm making bunny ears now, so please imagine. You don't have to pick one true path. You can trust that respectful engagement, mindful intention, and a willingness to let the goddesses introduce themselves as they wish. So again, you can call the Morrigan, right? And you could be calling that title. You could be using that as a title and see who presents, right? And again, that could be an exploration over the course of many different meetings or communications. But over time, you will develop a confidence, things will seem clearer. And honestly, that's why I wrote particularly chapter 2 in the book on the names and the aspects of the Morrigan, because it's so important to be able to map through the manuscript relationships and to kind of see it written down, because again, just kind of hearing references or vague references to it can be so confusing. So that resource is there for you, that book is there for you, so that you can step into these mysteries and stop guessing at who you're talking to, because when you start to know their stories, their contrast, their context, their lore, their actual literature, how and where they appear, then who you are dealing with on a practical level will become much clearer, right? So I'm going to tell you a little tale, a little story from the Cave of the Cats at Rathcroghan in County Roscommon. This is Uv Nagat or Owi Nagat. And this is a very sacred place for the Morrigan. It's a site that I've worked with for over 20 years, and sitting deep inside those dark limestone tunnels, I always notice how each echo, each trickle of water, each slop of mud is like a conversation with the tradition itself. And when I'm there and when I ask aloud for guidance, sometimes it's the Morrigan herself, her personal name. My relationship is with Morrigan herself. That would be my primary relationship. But sometimes it's Badb with her wild and sharp energy. Sometimes it's Macha who appears as more patient and steady to me. And at other times, Nemain's voice flickers or even screams at the edge. And each has her own story, her own message. But the cave holds it all together. It's woven and it's real. And I know that not everybody can visit this sacred site, go on pilgrimage there. It is absolutely a privilege to me that I got to spend time there on a daily basis for the decade that I was working there as both a tour guide and a manager of those sacred sites and the Heritage Centre there at Rathcroghan in County Roscommon, in Tulsk in County Roscommon. But one of the things that we do, say through the Morrigan Intensive, is a series of guided journeys to the cave as well, so that people can visit virtually or spiritually the other world version of the cave itself. So there are ways to access these places even if you can't physically get there, okay? Now, everything that I have shared today, every tangled thread of myth and meaning, is taken from the manuscript evidence that I do present to you in the Morrigan Ireland's Goddess. And if this stuff resonates with your practice, I humbly invite you to buy the book, and please, 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 please leave a review. Every single honest insight helps me reach that goal, that 10,000 sales milestone that I'm hitting for, and helps seekers everywhere to find a true foundation for their own relationship with the Morrigan. So again, I'm not trying to peddle the one true way. That book is a collection of the resources and the tools that will help every single reader find their own relationship with the Morrigan, and that's my goal. So your experience, my dear listener, your experience, your review, it really matters, not just for you, but for the community. So please do consider both buying and reviewing and recommending this book. Please, please, please. Now, practical solo exercise. We're going to do name, aspect, and intention. So this will take a few minutes, right? Could take 5 minutes, could take 10 minutes, whatever. But it is a micro practice that's worked for me and for hundreds of my students. So find a quiet spot. Outdoors is ideal, but an open window works too. Somewhere that you can just breathe and be for a little while, right? Then say each name out loud. Say Morrigan, Badb, Macha, Nemain. After you say each one, pause, breathe, notice what you feel, what you see, what you sense. Does one resonate stronger? And then ask very gently, if you wish to be known to me, guide me respectfully. and wait and see what impression comes, and then jot down a phrase or an image for each name in your journal, on your phone, or even just say it out loud. So again, cycle through that. So you have your quiet spot. Cycle through this process of saying the name out loud, pausing, breathing, noticing, being mindful of what you see, what you feel, what you sense, any resonation, and then ask gently, if you wish to be known to me, guide me respectfully, or, any version of that. It doesn't have to be those exact words. And then wait and see what impression comes, and then take a note of it, jot it down, whether it's a phrase, a word, an image, whatever it is, in whatever way that you're recording, because, we are recording our practices, right? So that we have a record. And go through each name, right? There's no pressure to get it perfect. There is no way to get it perfect. There is no perfection, right? The nuances in the sources themselves give us permission to sit in the mystery, to learn, to contemplate, to approach things one goddess at a time. So, Gura Mahagat, and thank you for choosing respect over TikTok trends and community over confusion. Your openness and your willingness to walk on this winding path, guided by me, facilitated by me, but it is your path that you're walking on. This is what keeps the actual tradition alive. This is what this respectful engagement, respectful interaction with the native tradition, perspective, sources, the actual reality that we have of the goddess, complex as it can be. This is what keeps the tradition alive. So, slán fóill. If you buy the book, please review. And I will see you next time on the podcast. Slán.